Emily's life was a waking nightmare from the moment she took her first breath. Her father, once a respected businessman, had fallen victim to the alluring yet destructive grip of alcohol. He drowned his sorrows in a never-ending stream of whiskey and gin, his once sharp mind dulled by the haze of intoxication. Her mother, a former beauty queen whose radiance had once turned heads, sought solace in the numbing embrace of drugs. As her husband spiraled deeper into the abyss of alcoholism, she found herself unable to cope with the pain and abuse that followed, turning to narcotics as a means of escape. Emily was a mere spectator in this twisted play, forced to bear witness to the unraveling of her family's fabric. Each day she would return from school, her backpack weighing heavily upon her shoulders, only to be greeted by the sound of her father's drunken ramblings and her mother's vacant stare, lost in a haze of drug-induced oblivion. The physical abuse was an ever-present specter in their household, a dark cloud that refused to dissipate. Emily would cower in her room, hands clasped tightly over her ears, desperately trying to block out the sickening sounds of her father's fists colliding with her mother's flesh. The thuds echoed through the walls, each one a haunting reminder of the hell they were trapped in. The abuse was relentless, and Emily's mother bore the brunt of her husband's rage. Slurred insults and accusations would pour from his lips, his words laced with venom, as he lashed out at the woman he had once vowed to love and cherish. The sound of flesh striking flesh would echo through the house, punctuated by her mother's anguished cries and pleas for mercy. Yet, even in the face of such brutality, Emily's mother remained trapped in her own personal hell, her mind clouded by the drugs she had come to rely on. She would cower in the corner, her body bruised and battered, her eyes glazed over as she sought refuge in the artificial euphoria of her narcotics. Emily would watch in horror, her heart pounding in her chest as her father's rage reached new heights. She would bear witness to the sickening sight of her mother's blood spattered across the walls, her body crumpled on the floor like a discarded rag doll. In those moments, Emily felt utterly powerless, a mere bystander in a tragedy that seemed to have no end in sight. She longed to intervene, to protect her mother from the monster that her father had become. But the fear of incurring his wrath paralyzed her, leaving her frozen in place, tears streaming down her cheeks. School was Emily's sole sanctuary, a temporary reprieve from the nightmare that awaited her at home. Yet, even within those hallowed halls, she found herself an outcast, a pariah among her peers. Her tattered clothes and unkempt appearance, a direct result of the turmoil that plagued her household, made her an easy target for ridicule and whispered taunts. She had no friends, no one to confide in or share the burden of her suffering with. The teachers, oblivious to the depths of her plight, did nothing to alleviate the pain that consumed her. As the years ticked by, Emily's hope dwindled, replaced by a deep-seated despair that threatened to consume her very soul. She felt utterly alone in the world, abandoned by those who were supposed to love and protect her unconditionally. The weight of her circumstances became a crushing burden, too heavy for her young shoulders to bear, and the thought of ending it all began to take root in her mind, a twisted escape from the hell she endured. On the day of her high school graduation, a day that should have been filled with joy and celebration, Emily found herself standing alone in the auditorium, a solitary figure amidst a sea of beaming faces and proud families. There were no proud parents, no beaming relatives, no one to cheer her on as she received her hard-earned diploma. It was in that moment that the harsh reality of her isolation hit her like a ton of bricks, a cruel reminder of the loneliness that had become her constant companion. As she clutched the rolled-up parchment in her trembling hands, Emily's mind raced with thoughts of her bleak future. What was the point of going on when there was no one to share her triumphs or console her in her failures? The prospect of living a life devoid of love and support, a life where she would forever be alone, was too much for her fragile heart to bear. Emily's eyes stung with unshed tears As she watched her classmates embrace their loved ones, their faces alight with joy and pride, she couldn't help but feel a pang of envy, a longing for the warmth and acceptance that seemed to elude her. As the families celebrated, exchanging hugs and congratulations, Emily stood apart, a silent observer of a happiness she had never known. The weight of her isolation bore down upon her, suffocating her with its intensity. She felt like an outsider, a stranger in a world that seemed to have no place for her. The laughter and cheers of her peers only served to amplify the aching void within her heart, a constant reminder of the love and support she had been denied. In those moments, Emily's despair threatened to consume her entirely. She longed for someone, anyone, to see her, to acknowledge her existence and offer a glimmer of hope in the darkness that had become her life. But as she scanned the crowd, her gaze met only indifference, a cruel reflection of the abandonment she had endured for far too long. With a heavy heart and a resolve born of sheer desperation, Emily made her way to the roof of the school building. The wind whipped through her hair, a cruel mockery of the freedom she so desperately craved. As she stood on the edge, staring down at the unforgiving concrete below, her body trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of the decision she had made. In those final moments, Emily's mind was a whirlwind of emotions, a tempest of memories and regrets that threatened to overwhelm her. She thought of the countless nights she had spent crying herself to sleep, her pillow damp with tears as she longed for the comfort and love that had been so cruelly denied to her. She thought of the bruises that marred her skin, a constant reminder of the abuse she had endured, the marks never seeming to fade before new ones took their place. And she thought of the constant hunger for affection that gnawed at her very soul, a yearning for the warmth and acceptance that had eluded her for far too long. Emily's thoughts turned to her mother, a mere shell of the vibrant woman she once was, her spirit crushed by the relentless torment she endured at the hands of her father. And then there was her father himself, a monster consumed by his own demons, his once loving heart twisted and corrupted by the grip of alcoholism and rage. As she stood on that precipice, Emily couldn't help but wonder how her life had spiraled so far out of control, how the love and security she had once known had been replaced by a living hell from which there seemed no escape. The weight of her circumstances bore down upon her, crushing her beneath its immense burden, and in that moment, the thought of ending it all seemed like the only reprieve. With a deep breath, Emily steeled her resolve and stepped off the ledge, embracing the rush of air as she plummeted towards the ground below. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as she fell, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. She was terrified, her heart pounding in her chest, but beneath that fear lay a strange sense of peace, an acceptance of the fate she had chosen for herself. But as the seconds ticked by, something stirred within her, a flicker of hope that refused to be extinguished. A realization dawned upon her, a truth that had been obscured by the darkness that had consumed her life. She had endured so much already, survived the unimaginable, and emerged battered but unbroken. In that moment, Emily recognized the strength that had been lying dormant within her all along, a resilience that she had never given herself credit for. In a desperate act of self-preservation, Emily reached out and managed to grab onto a ledge, her fingers clawing at the concrete as she fought against gravity's pull. The rough surface tore at her skin, leaving her fingertips raw and bleeding, but she clung on with every ounce of strength she had left. With a burst of adrenaline coursing through her veins, she swung her body towards a nearby window, shattering the glass with the force of her impact. Emily lay on the floor, shards of glass cutting into her flesh, her body battered and bruised, but miraculously alive. The pain was excruciating, radiating through every fiber of her being, but in that moment, it was a reminder that she was still breathing, still clinging to the fragile thread of life. Tears streamed down her face, a torrent of emotions washing over her as the weight of her decision hit her with full force. She had come so close to ending it all, to surrendering to the darkness that had consumed her for far too long. But in that moment of clarity, when the abyss had yawned before her, she had chosen life, chosen to fight for the future that had once seemed so bleak. As she cradled her broken hand, the bones protruding through the mangled flesh, Emily knew that her journey was far from over. The road ahead would be long and arduous, fraught with challenges and obstacles that would test her resolve time and time again. But in that moment, she had proven to herself that she possessed an inner strength that could not be extinguished, a resilience that had been forged in the fires of her suffering. She was alone, utterly and completely alone, but she was alive. And in that moment, that was enough. The realization washed over her like a tidal wave, and she found herself overcome with a maelstrom of emotions. Sobs racked her body, raw and primal, as she released the pain and anguish that had been bottled up for far too long. Emily cried maniacally, her tears mingling with the blood that seeped from her wounds, a cathartic release of the despair and hopelessness that had nearly consumed her. But beneath those tears lay a glimmer of hope, a newfound determination to forge a path forward, to rise from the ashes of her past and create a life worth living. In that moment, as she lay broken and battered on the floor, Emily felt a sense of gratitude wash over her. Gratitude for the chance to start anew, to leave behind the horrors of her childhood and embrace the possibility of a future untainted by the demons that had haunted her for so long. It would be a long and arduous journey, but for the first time in her life, Emily felt a glimmer of hope, a belief that she could overcome the obstacles that lay ahead and emerge victorious. With a newfound determination, Emily vowed to break free from the shackles of her past. She would seek help, find a way to escape the toxic environment that had nearly consumed her. And one day, she would look back on this moment as the turning point, the catalyst that set her on a path towards healing and self-discovery. For now, she would allow herself to cry, to release the pain and anguish that had been bottled up for far too long. But tomorrow, she would rise, battered but unbroken, ready to face the world on her own terms.